Okay, great. Thank you everyone for joining us for the admissions tests and interviews session. Jake from Imperial College London will be leading the presentation, and then I will join again afterwards to lead the panel Q&A. So if you haven't already submitted a question, please put yours in the Q&A box at the bottom there, and we'll get to them and answer them live following the presentation. So without further ado, over to you, Jake. Thank you.
Thanks, Rory. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the conference. My name is Jake, and I'm the Senior International Officer at Imperial College London. So this session today is really aimed to give you guys a bit of overview of what type of admissions tests we normally introduce as part of the selection process, particularly for some of the competitive highly selective degree programs within these 5 leading universities. Some universities may be introducing admissions exams, some probably don't have those as part of the procedure, but these presentations give you that kind of clear idea about what you need to sort of advise your students in terms of preparing for admissions exams, as well as interviews. So we're gonna quickly start with the application journey. So next slide, please, if that's okay. Thank you very much. So in terms of the actual application journey, it is fairly straightforward. I'm sure for those of you who have been advising students to study in the UK, all applications will be submitted to UCAS, which stands for University College Admission Services, which is like a centralized admissions platform to receive all the data, and then will be downloaded to universities later on. And in terms of the actual sort of timeline, we're looking at admissions team will initially be pre-screening all applications, and then for eligible candidates who will be appearing strong or maybe eligible for the program they apply for, they will be then invited for admission exam or interview for some of the programs in certain sort of institutions. And then before a formal decision is made, usually these these are normally as part of the selection process before we can make that final decision. So if you're going to apply for, say, Oxford or Cambridge and any of the above institutions, so the deadline to remember will be on the 15th October, and same for medicine, vet science, and dentistry, these kind of programs. Again, the deadline is also on the 15th October. From UCAS, the latest updates we have, so the final deadline for January has been slightly changed from 15th January to the last Wednesday of January for 2023 entry. That'll be on the 25th January 2023. So you might be wondering why we actually introduce admissions tests and interviews. So first of all, I just want to quickly say admissions exams, these are kind of entrance exams that universities uses to sort of select students for the course. And in addition to the school qualifications, we tend to have a large number of students who share very similar academic grades. So usually they are very competitive, but also they tend to have very sort of strong academic profiles. In order for us to choose fairly between candidates on paper, we normally use admission exams as an indicator to choose what type of candidates are suitable for the program. And so the purpose of this is actually to match the right student to the right course. So there are different types of the exams as well. So students may be receiving, say, pre-interview tests. These usually will be introduced by certain departments, certain institutions as well. Again, there are different types of exams to be aware of, both including institution exam and also external assessments. For example, medicine, there will be BMAT or UCAT. For mathematics, that will be MAT or TMUA. And there will also be some at-interview tests as well. So these are usually sort of the, problem-solving written assessment sort of taking place during the interview sort of session. And these are normally asked during the interview time, but also that's all a way for university to identify whether students has got a kind of problem-solving skills during the interview performance. There will also be some post-application open day and interviews as part of the selection process as well. So in order for us to choose fairly between candidates on paper and also for us to match the right students to the right course, these are usually introduced as part of the selection procedure. most candidates, when they apply to, these kind of highly selected universities, they are required to take subject-specific admissions assessment. These could either be an internal assessment, for example, normally an exam designed by the university, or they can take external assessment. These are usually assessed externally outside the university. So this might be, say, before shortlisting for interview. Usually pre-registration is required, or after they have been shortlisted for interview. So these are all designed to supplement the information in the student's application and also to assess different skill sets as well. For example, there will be numerical skills, analytical skills, thinking skills, writing and the language skills to be tested on. But the performance in assessments will not be considered in isolation. So that means we do take a very holistic approach in order to make the final decision. So every single aspect of application will be taken into account alongside different elements of the application. Of course, each subject will have very different expectations. For example, what makes a good engineering student will be very different to what makes a successful medicine student. And mathematicians, need to be very strong at numbers and numerical skills using data. But for English language applicants, they tend to be able to analyze closely a piece of writing, for example. So for some courses, students may be asked to submit different examples of work. For example, UCL will be requiring a portfolio or written assessment during interview, and that normally will be discussed at interview as well. Again, one thing to remember is, don't let students miss the deadline. Usually missing deadlines means they probably have to wait another year to reapply in a new cycle, or they have to take additional exams in the summer month to actually complement what they can provide during that particular admissions journey. Again, this is not normally recommended, so we do always encourage students to check the latest updates on the websites. That could be internal institutional pages or external exam web pages to check the latest updates on what deadlines they need to submit the written work by. Again, this can vary from institution to institution, and different skills will be tested on as well. And also, again, there will be very different courses require very different knowledge. So in terms of the actual skill sets, there are mainly 3 things we are testing on. So as I mentioned earlier on, usually these are problem-solving skills, thinking skills, and also whether they're able to communicate effectively. These are usually reflected on the writing task. The actual knowledge level will normally be covering the basic school level curriculum. So they don't have to worry about preparing anything beyond that kind of school level scale. And usually, it's about how much they have learned during the school and environment, but also to really, test whether they're able to apply that kind of theories and skills into the real world as well. So generally speaking, these are normally the main things we are using to test the student's suitability for the program. Here are some examples. As you can see, Imperial is probably the most fussy one of all here. So most departments and courses at Imperial will require interviews. I'll probably say 95% of courses would require interviews and admissions exams. So these are usually pre-interview assessments to be taken before they can be shortlisted for interviews. And the scores from these exams will be used as indicators to assess someone's suitability, and of course, including medicine as well. And for UCL, slightly fewer courses to be needed for this kind of procedures. Usually will be law, architecture, and medicine. And LSE, possibly the same. So for law, Department of Mathematics, again, this is one of the departments actually requires, and they don't actually require these kind of admission exams, but if students do take those kind of exams, they can be desired for certain programs. And also, of course, King's College, very similar to some of the science programs we have at Imperial and UCL Medicine. One thing to be sort of bear in mind here is that King's College has a very different admission exam. So they would normally be needing UCAT instead of the BMAT, which is normally required by Imperial and UCL here. So if your student is going to apply for both medical schools at King's and Imperial or UCL, they may potentially have to take both UCAT and BMAT. Now we're going to spend a couple of more minutes talking about interviews and why we interview candidates, and also what kind of preparation tips you can give to your students. First of all, I just want to say there is no sort of blueprint for an ideal or perfect students. So because we do assess everybody individually, but also we're looking at and looking for different things in different people for very different courses. So as a result of that, there is no sort of magic formula that will guarantee students a place. So admissions tutors are normally looking for students who they believe have that kind of most academic ability, but also potential. These are normally people that are best suited to the course to apply for, and people who will benefit from the learning environment we have to offer at that kind of university level. So take Imperial, for example. So almost all of the departments and applicants when they apply, they will have very top-notch grades, either 44 IB diploma or 45 occasionally, but also A stars across the board. So it's very difficult to select fairly based on the personal statements and UCAS applications alone. So therefore, interview can really help us to sort of assess someone's academic potential and suitability for the course they have chosen. And we really can give that student the opportunity to expand on the application as well, to show us how they think about the subject outside the UCAS application form, and also the ability to demonstrate their interest in and commitment to the program they want to apply for. This is a really good opportunity for students to really, market themselves a little bit more outside the paperwork. And also if somebody says, I'm the best communicator, I'm one of the best sport player, in the personal statement, and this is the chance for them to really flaunt those skill sets and also abilities. So these are usually the reasons why we interview. In terms of the actual content of the interview and what do interviews involve, this can also vary from university to university. And university will normally be sending out really detailed information and advice about interviews. So don't worry about, not knowing what kind of format and what kind of preparation they need to make beforehand, because we do share this kind of information in advance of interviewing anybody. So we tend to send information about, what kind of dates they are available for interviews, and what kind of format an interview will be conducted, and how to assess interviews as well sometimes, how to prepare. And also if they don't really know anything about preparing for interviews, and always feel free to ask, because we are here to help you, and also we want students to be able to succeed in their interviews. In terms of the actual timeline, these can take place during the first 3 weeks of December, although some may be early January. A small number of candidates may be invited to, say, a further interview in January after the main interview period. So if they do decide to apply, we tend to say, keep this time free of any unbreakable, commitments. Although interviews can take place towards the end of the application process, it's also important to remember, this is not the final hurdle, and the performance interview alone, again, doesn't determine outcome of any application. So as I always say, there is no single aspect of any application leads to rejection or acceptance. So the main focus of interview really is to explore the academic potential, motivation and suitability, these three main things for the chosen course. So the questions are designed to really assess the students' problem-solving abilities, which is very similar to admission exam, but also how they engage with new ideas, information, and whether they are able to have that kind of clarity and flexibility of thought, and to provide a kind of analytical reasoning for the problem we give them. So it's really important for them to remember the interviews are not designed to sort of interrogate anybody. And, we're not trying to catch students out. It will be challenging, some challenging question to be asked, but it's not designed to sort of catch one out. But also it's a chance for students to show how they can apply their kind of existing knowledge and skills laterally to kind of unfamiliar problems. So it's really helpful for us to gauge, how they will respond to the teaching methods we use at, institution level, but also is very similar in many ways to supervisions as well. So in terms of actual questions, they are normally, discussion based. predominantly, say, academic and subject related. So we don't tend to ask any obscure questions, you know. They're normally relevant to the course they have applied for. They're normally about the information they have already provided in the personal statement or reference letters or anything they have provided as part of the supporting documentation. So in all subjects, whether that's interview or admissions test, we're looking for that kind of informed enthusiasm and the ability to really think independently about their subject as well. So students may find, you know, some of the questions quite challenging, and that's okay. And they're designed to encourage the student to think for themselves, and they can then sort of develop that kind of argument or tackle a problem. So there is no need to panic if they don't know the answer. It's okay to pause and think about it. You know, we want to find out how they think and also apply their current knowledge and how well they can expand on and that kind of knowledge to unfamiliar problems, rather than how much they really know. Very often, particularly in science, you know, take Imperial, for example, again, there is no sort of right or wrong answers to the questions asked. It's more like a process of reaching the answer that's generally more important than the actual answer itself. So I would say not to be afraid to consider new ideas if they don't understand something. So we want them to say so, and feel free to ask for clarifications if there's anything they're not clear about. And also really important to sort of answer the questions in the wrong way, because we want to hear, you know, what they have to say about the subject. You know, don't just say what we want to hear, but also we want, you know, them to actually use their own words to talk about their own interest and enthusiasm about a subject they have applied for. There are some interview tips we have come up with. Again, this can vary from university to university, but generally speaking, it's all kind of very similar. You know, it's always useful to know what to expect. You know, from the previous slide, I mentioned that always being able to ask about the format, what kind of you know, style they have to be doing interview with the candidate, with an admissions tutor, and when they're going to have the interview, and also what type of questions they may be asked. So these things actually can be asked before they come here for interview. It's useful to be familiar with what's likely to happen during the interview. That can also help students calm a lot of nerves, you know, to give them a bit of idea of what they can expect on the day. They may also be finding useful to watch some of the interview recordings we have uploaded on our social media platforms, for example. There will be plenty of digital resources for students to watch back as well. And also we do give very clear instructions about how they can prepare. There will be possible questions they can probably predict. So keep in mind, you know, they will be asked a question relevant to the course they have applied for, of course. And also they will be about information they have already provided in that kind of written elements of the application. So think about the question that may be asked and how they would answer them, you know, such as why medicine, or why civil engineering, or why law? You know, why have you chosen architecture, not civil engineering or design engineering? Or if they have any specific areas of interest. And also useful to really just review the personal statement and any written work they have provided at a stage. Think about the topics relevant to the subject, which particularly interests the person, and also where possible try to reference, let's say, the author or the title of things they have read. This can be really useful as well to really talk about, you know, things they've done outside of that kind of school curriculum. And also read around the subject. You know, this is also linking back to what I said about the extracurricular activities and also some of the things they've done outside of the classroom. So maybe they have done a wider reading outside of the actual school teaching curriculum. Think about particular topics they like to talk about. You know, they can, you know, to some degree, of course, direct an interview by showing high-level interest in specific topics, and also try to remember, say, the author's name, the title of the journal they have read. You know, for example, in science subjects, read in more depth about one or more aspects of the subjects that particularly interest the students. That could be a scientific journal or some popular science magazines or books. In addition to that, make sure the actual knowledge of the students' understanding is fluent. You know, they have to be able to really engage with that kind of new ideas, new information they have received outside of the school classroom. If you're going to apply for some sort of artistic or humanities subjects, which do sometimes also require interviews, make sure they have read something outside of the sort of prescribed tests for the school and college subjects, and they have really thought about that particular thing critically about what they have read as well. So they may be asked about topical issues and connected to the course. So again, it's very important to be able to, keeping themselves up to date with current affairs. Think about some of the main challenges, say, doctors are facing and engineers are facing, what kind of data problems we all have at the moment. So to really think about that kind of future thinking skills they have. So that's going to be quite useful in terms of actual, answer to the questions during that interview. And of course, being able to ask a question as well, it's very important for them to raise questions and think critically and, talk about what they don't know about the program. They may have already been reading a lot of things about the program, the teaching approach, maybe have chatted to some of the students as well, but there will always some information they don't really know or can't really find from the website. And that's the chance for students to really just ask questions. I always think interview is like a two-way process. So you are judging someone's suitability, but also is a chance for students to judge whether that kind of institution is right for them. So it's really important for them to go in with a mindset that this is a chance for them to find out whether this kind of institution they want to apply for and become a member of. And of course, finally, always make sure to be punctual and authentic when they answer the questions. So there are things we're not looking for. As I said earlier on, we are not looking for that kind of rehearsed speech or incredibly smooth performance. And we all understand everyone is human being and we can make mistakes during interview, particularly when somebody is nervous about a particular event. It's okay to pause and think about the questions and before they answer them. We would rather someone give us the suitable right answers or something relevant to the program than just making something up. So again, we're not expecting anyone to be a Wikipedia or know every single possible answer to the questions we ask. There is no need to prepare or pre-rehearse any speeches. We want them to use their own words and voices to talk about their own interested in the program rather than, think about what we want to hear or what their parents or teachers want to hear. And extracurricular activities, again, this is not something we normally require and definitely not compulsory to talk about. Again, you probably have already gathered by now, and this is not something we tend to focus on. We do want to know what kind of things students do outside academic classrooms, but it's all about finding out the skill sets they have gained from doing these activities, rather than giving us kind of like shopping list, giving us, say, I have done activities 1 to 3. We always want them to really be able to evidence and reflect on the skill sets. So these could be the benefits they have gained from doing these extracurricular activities, but also what kind of skill sets have prepared them for the program they have applied for. Rather than giving us kind of a long, boring laundry list, we do want to know what kind of evidence and reflection skills they have during that kind of interview performance. Okay, that's all from me, and there will be plenty more information to find out more about the interview procedures and admissions exams from our university websites, which are now listed on the web on the screen. And also, of course, you can find out more from UCAS for profiles about our degrees as well. Now we're going to open for some questions, and feel free to use the chat function to type in your questions, and we're going to be verbalizing some of the answers live as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Jake. If I could please welcome the panelists on camera, and we'll get through some of the questions that we've got. As a reminder, please pop them in the Q&A function at the bottom there if you've got any questions, and we'll get through them during the question and answer session. I've just seen a few coming in now, which is great. We also got some questions, from the registration before the conference took place. So we'll go through those questions as well. Okay, let me start with a few of those pre-prepared ones. Bear with me. Right, so a couple of questions came through really in terms of benchmarking scores and the levels of scores that we look for. Is this something that we publish or you guys publish on your websites? And is this information readily available for prospective students? Sarah, can we come to you to begin with? Thanks.
Hello, hi there everybody. My name's Sarah Bennett. I'm the admissions tutor for the medicine degree programme at UCL Medical School. So in terms of the aptitude tests that students take for medicine across all medical schools in the UK, most medical schools do put on their website either the average scores for the cohorts that apply each year, or their cut-off scores, which the cut-off scores won't be available until the end of the admissions process. So the cut-off scores for this cycle, for example, won't be available probably until May or June time when we know who we've interviewed. The cut-off scores are different across every school. They are dependent on the cohort that apply each year. For the biomedical admissions test, the BMAT test, because the scores are normalised on a scale of 1 to 9, that also does mean that the test scores each year are quite different. So it can be tricky to compare scores each year for students. But what I would advise to do is for students to try their best in those admissions tests, to use pre-prepared material, so all the free online material. So UCAT and Cambridge Assessment provide all of the past papers on there, and so everyone can do those past papers and do them timed as well, so you get used to the timings, and that is very, very good preparation for them. But the cut-off scores and the averages tend to be on all of our websites.
Is that the same case for you, Jake? I know you have more tests than most institutions as well, though.
For medicine, mathematics, yes, it's the same. We do publicize those kind of cutoff scores, but for internal admissions exams within the department, usually these are quite hidden. We tend to keep them to ourselves. So again, we do let people know, what type of questions we ask them. So yeah, that's nothing to be scared of. Yeah.
Great, that's good to know. And from Kingsley's perspective, we don't really publish the scores, but the general advice really for the UCAT is that we look for an average score of around 650 to 700 across the 4 sections. It would put your student in a competitive position. So yeah, that info is kind of readily available from your student recruitment managers. So please feel free to ask if you do have any questions for any students for any upcoming tests as well. But with the LMAT, yeah, that's usually something we don't publish on our websites. Just taking a look at a few more questions as they come in. And again, please do use the Q&A function if you do have any questions for our panelists. So let's just double check with the ones that come through. Question about the shadowing and work experience in relation to the interview process. So is this something that your institution will focus on during some of the interview questions? And do you have any recommendations on how best their students can prepare for those sorts of questions? Sarah, could I come back to you on that one to begin with?
Yeah, of course. So obviously I'll focus on medicine as my topic. Absolutely. So I would always encourage teachers, advisors and students to really think about why we suggest students do work experience. There is a really good reason behind it, not least to try and work out, is a caring profession for you, but also so that you can get a realistic view of what it is like to work with other people, to care and look after others, and to also develop skills, attributes and behaviours that are suitable for a career in medicine or healthcare. So work experience is incredibly important. It doesn't have to be clinical. It can be volunteering work, it can be paid activity. There's a plethora of online work experience that's now available because of the pandemic, and that is excellent. There are excellent resources that are online. So particularly for medicine, Brighton and Sussex Medical School have some good resources, and the Royal College of General Practitioners have Observed GP, so they have GP consultations that you can look at. What is key is that you reflect, that you think after you've done any sort of experience, what did I learn from this? What surprised me? What interested me? And therefore, how can I talk about this within my personal statement or within an interview? It's highly likely that at an interview you will be asked about your work experience at some stage, whether that's in an MMI or in a panel-based interview. But certainly your work experience is important examples. So if they ask you about how have you developed your communication skills, draw on your work experience for that. How have you seen any of the empathy in any of the interactions that you've had? Those sorts of things really do help. So for interviews, I would always recommend that you try and have examples of situations and examples of where you have developed those skills as well.
Anything further to add, Jake?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think I covered quite a bit of that in the presentation as well, as, you know, to evidence what kind of skill set they have gained rather than describing things on the surface level, because that simply doesn't add much value to the actual answer. So if you really want to impress the panel and also to showcase your genuine interest, it's always good to use, you know, good scenarios and also use the relevant things, valuable experience to really showcase that. But yeah, don't just claim things, but also, you know, be able to reflect on the skill sets.
Perfect. Yeah, and a sub question just off the back of your answer, really, Sarah. Of course, you mentioned during the COVID times trying to get that experience. How did your admission staff look at that online experience, or is there? You mentioned Brighton Sussex offers some good resources there. It would be good maybe just to highlight the great experience that can still give you, even though it's still only online. And is that something that you think will continue, even though more people start to begin their experience more in person as we go ahead?
I really do think so, Rory, that I think there's a lot of pressure on students thinking that they need to have clinical-based work experience, that you have to have shadowed a doctor. And that's absolutely not the case at all. We know, certainly in the UK, it's incredibly difficult, even pre-pandemic, for students to gain clinical-based work experience because, you know, staff are busy in hospitals, and it's often quite difficult to support students in that sort of way in the workplace. And so online work experience is incredibly valuable and is seen as equally as good. As I say, whatever you do, it's quality over quantity. So it's not that you are at an advantage because you've done clinical-based work experience. You may have only done one day, you may have done half a day in a clinical workplace, but actually you can have such rich experience from that, and in-depth reflections on what you've seen and what skills you've demonstrated as a result of that. That can be as good as looking online. It can be as good as working in a shop and serving customers, working in a team, showing your commitment by turning up on time every day, by working for a charity, by working for some of the voluntary work that's happened over the pandemic. Lots of our students have worked in vaccination centres or have befriended elderly people nearby or have worked in food banks. And all of that, in my opinion, is incredibly valuable experience, and none of it is worth more than any of the others.
Anything to add, Jake?
Yeah, absolutely. Just echo what Sarah has said about it. I think during pandemic, we actually have more resources than ever at the moment. So there are so many accessible, you know, resources available for students to take on and also to learn about medicine overall. It doesn't have to be, you know, in that kind of clinical setting. You know, for example, Imperial, we're also looking for students who are able to reach out to, you know, somebody who's got maybe learning difficulties or work in a social environment to be able to care for the disabled children, for example. That's one of the examples that we had quite often last year. So these are basically, the aptitudes we normally want to see, that they can show the care and also empathy towards the patients. So that's also doable for us.
That's good to know. So another question's come through, which I think could be quite a common challenge that some very bright students face, is that they're very excellent academically, but maybe the communication skills is probably an area where they may find challenging. One of the councillors have asked, is that something they could highlight in the reference or contact our universities about in advance, or would that be an area for that student to work on before the interviews take place? How would you approach that, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, actually. I mean, obviously, most of the students who apply to us are 17 years old and have not yet had the chance to develop all of their skills. We're not looking for the finished product when you come into interview. But what we are looking for is somebody with an understanding of what skills are required, and somebody who has started to develop them and has the potential to develop them further. Because we do an incredible amount of teaching on communication skills when you come onto the medicine degree programme. And so we're absolutely not expecting you to be perfect. However, I would recommend that if that is something that students are struggling with, that is something they practice. And as I've said, all work experiences can help develop your communication skills. I will be the first to admit that I was incredibly shy when I was in my teens. I found it very hard to go and do work experience. So I went to medical school at UCL as well. And what really helped me was a volunteering opportunity that I got in a hospital to go and work on the wards with healthcare assistants, to make beds, to deliver the teas and coffees and biscuits and all the meals to the patients. And it so helped me to develop my own communication skills. And that is not only the verbalizing, the actual talking and being confident about talking and articulating, the listening, that is an incredibly important part of communicating, and the eye contact too. So as part of the interview, we'll be looking at all of those things. We would know that it won't be perfect. We know that at interviews you're nervous, and that does affect your communication skills, and we will take that into consideration. But I think it is something that does need to be started to develop. And so practice talking to people, practice talking to friends and family about what you've done. Try and articulate your experiences to other people, and that will help as well.
Amazing answer and some great tips there for sure. And Jake, I know with Imperial there's a few of the different tests that students may prepare for. Is communication equally as important for some of the other tests, maybe for more like chemistry or maths?
Yeah, I think communication skill is like a core part of all interviews, regardless of what course they apply for. And as I always say, the confident communication is a skill and it can be learned. Most people feel hesitant the first few times they have to speak, say, in public. I was incredibly shy and introverted as a teenager as well. In my adolescent years, I couldn't even answer telephone calls. But currently, as my main role, I have to deliver public information to a wide audience. So this is something, is time served, the confidence level can be improved over the years. Again, as I said, just keep practicing. Don't feel deterred just because you are currently shy. As I said, we are not looking for the kind of perfect students, and nobody is going to be perfect during the interview. So we are looking for that kind of potential to be able to deliver and also succeed on the program. So if we see they have the suitability and also great potential to do well, that can also be okay.
Yeah, awesome. I think the key message is there. We're not looking for the finished article, and we understand everyone gets nervous, especially on a big day like an interview. So yeah, certainly a message for the councillors there that we're not looking for the finished article. So I'll just head to the next few questions. The common theme really is about the types of tests, international equivalents to the tests. I know, Jake, in the presentation you were very specific about which institution requires what, but Are there any international equivalents that students can take, or does it have to be specifically these tests? Can we come back to you, Jake, on that one?
I just want to quickly clarify international equivalencies. Do you mean the qualifications from schools or?
Yeah, so that, for example, the question comes through from Lisa saying, are there any US testing equivalents to the UCAT or BMAT, for example, and could students take those, and could they be equally considered, or would it have to be specifically the BMAT or the UCAT or the LMAT, for example?
I mean, medicine, I know the answer is no.
Yeah.
To that. So it has to be either UCAT or BMAT, depending on the medical school they apply for. I mean, for our sort of, you know, we do identify what type of exam they have to prepare for. And also for some of the exams, as I said, they're institutional exams. They're normally designed by the department institution they apply for. Regardless of what exam they go for, the actual content and the school curriculums, it's going to cover the basic school curriculum anyway. So as long as the US school or whatever the school they're studying at it is providing that kind of level of knowledge, they should be okay. You know, yeah, it's a quite broad question. I don't know how to answer.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I think it's just really reinforcing the point that there are specific tests that we require, and so we really encourage you as counsellors to get the point across that these are the specific tests that we need, and there's no point signing up to what may be believed as an equivalent test because it won't be accepted. So just wanted to get that point across to the counsellors here. I'm just taking a look at the next few questions. So again, about one that's come through about interview format, so especially which could have been slightly affected because of the pandemic. Yes, pre-pandemic, what was your interview formats? And then during the pandemic, I assume it went online. How did you host your interviews that way? Sarah, can we come to you on that one?
Of course, yeah. So UCL traditionally has been a panel-based interview. And so it would be in person for everybody, including our international applicants as well, because we really do think that there is value to meeting the person, and indeed for the person to come and meet us. You know, it's a two-way process. You need to know that you're coming to an institution that you want to come to. And so in person, we also offer tours of the campus, and that you can actually meet our medical students as well. So it's a bit like an open day. And so I think it's incredibly valuable for it to be in person. During the pandemic, of course, everything went online. And so in 2021, all medical schools ran online. This academic year, there have been one or two that have gone back to in person. And I anticipate that probably most will go back to in person next academic year, because of the value of being in person and the differences, the nuances in communication skills that we were talking about can sometimes be a bit lost in an online interview. Although I have to say they've run very smoothly for us over the last 2 years. We've continued with panel-based as a result. And I think a lot of candidates found it quite useful actually to be online, as they were also at home as well, with the multiple lockdowns that we've had across the world. We are hoping at UCL to actually move to multiple mini interviews. There is a lot of good evidence for MMIs and the way that they assess applicants in multiple stations with multiple interviewers. We were hoping to do that 2 years ago, but the pandemic hit. And so my plan very much for 2023 entry is for students to be sitting on new MMI. Our interviews tend to be between December and March, and that's the same for most medical schools. And so you will be invited at any point during that time to come to an interview. I suspect that we may continue to hold some international interviews online as well, because no doubt in the winter season here in the UK, we may have problems with the pandemic again. And so we're all going to have to be a bit flexible about what way we interview moving forwards.
How about you, Jake? How did yours transition online, and do you see that continuing in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, it's actually opening a lot of more opportunities to meet a wider range of audience across the globe. So definitely for our medicine, we have been using MMIs for all our interviews, and currently we're doing this hybrid mode. It's kind of blended approach of using both online and in-person interviews. For a certain number of students, hopefully the risk is a lot lower now. People can actually come on campus to meet us in person. But yeah, it's definitely going to be continued, and actually more departments are now choosing to interview international candidates, students from outside the UK, using these kind of online tools for us to find suitable candidates. So definitely something that's worth mentioning to students, to be prepared for being interviewed when applying for these kind of programs.
I've had a really interesting question come through to do with accents, especially of the interviewers. So bear with me whilst I read this one out. It's a question from Philip. If an international applicant genuinely has difficulty following the interviewer's questions based on a lack of exposure to a particular British accent, what polite approaches could the student take to avoid the wrong impression that their English listening comprehension skills are lacking? Pretty good question there, and not one I've come across personally before. But Sarah, I see you nodding. Do you have any tips for that?
I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I would say that actually a lot of British people have difficulty sometimes distinguishing accents, because some people's accents can be quite strong. And so I would imagine that there will be a lot of people, not just people from overseas, that sometimes do struggle with that. And it's perfectly acceptable to ask the interviewer to repeat the question or to rephrase the question. That's not a problem at all. We don't mind that. We know that online interviews, there's often internet lag and delays and all sorts of things that happen. And so frequently we've had students asking us to repeat questions for them. And so please don't worry about that. Just make sure that you just ask politely, would you mind repeating the question for me?
Yeah. I assume, I think that would be the same case for King's, and I assume similar tips there from Imperial standpoint, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the accents and tones, these are hard things to gauge and manage as the students, particularly from outside the UK. It's perfectly okay to ask the interviewer to repeat. And also, I think all other interviewers are trained, but also very culturally sensitive as well. So we are able to understand, their own backgrounds, the linguistic skills they have. So it's not something to be afraid of. Definitely, you would rather get the questions clearer before you give like a vague or inappropriate answer. So I know they are worried about managing reactions, that kind of scenario, but nothing to be afraid of. We are equally nervous when we interview students from outside of here. So yeah, remember that as well.
Perfect. Cheers, guys. Good question. Thank you for that, Philip. Question through from Kim regarding where students can take these various tests. Are they online? Do they have to go to a local testing center? Are you guys able to shed a little light on the differences between the tests? Going back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, so certainly I can talk about BMAT.
Yeah.
So the BMAT test is taken across the world. So there are various centers across the world that you can go to. So they may not be in every single country or in every single area. I certainly know of a couple of students. I was talking to a student from Cambodia earlier on today, who's here in the UK studying, who had to go to Singapore to go and take her BMAT test. So there are occasions where students may have to travel to go and take the test, but there is quite a wide availability. I can't get my words out either this afternoon. There is a wide availability across the world for that. Rory, you might be able to answer about UCAT, perhaps.
Yeah, UCAT is a similar thing, assessment center. So you would have to sign up to go to a local assessment center, but similar to, as Sarah said, you may not find them locally to you. And again, similar with LMAT. And of course, come autumn time, fall time, these testing centers get booked up pretty quickly. So it pays to prepare well in advance to book those a suitable time, given the application timeline that Jake touched on in his presentation. And come to you, Jake, any of those other tests that you require?
Sure, slightly different. I think both you and Sarah have covered. For BMAT UCAT, same as Imperial. I just want to quickly highlight mathematics and our engineering programs. So we do require MAT or STEP paper. So these are usually these are usually exams we examine to take in country. So there will be some international schools in various countries, different parts of the world as test centers, or using the British Council abroad to take those exams as well. So these are also test centers. So I'll definitely say, as you know, say San Francisco in this case is one of those international cities in the world. I do predict that they will have plenty of test centers for these. And apart from those, all other tests from Imperial will be online, so they don't have to go anywhere. They can just do that from the comfort of their own home.
Cheers, guys. A question comes through from Patricia. Just wants a little clarification about abuse. Would a student submit their UCAS application and then get invited to take a pre-interview test, and then if they did well in that, be invited to an interview? Are you able just to confirm the timeline, Jake, please?
Sure, absolutely. So usually that kind of depending on how suitable we consider our candidates to be during that kind of initial pre-screening. So if we think we see potential, the students can be shortlisted for interview, we will then invite them for interview. That normally happen during November and January time. Again, it's on a rolling basis, of course. So depending on how busy they are and also how many applications we receive after the January deadline, that can also vary from course to course. Again, pre-interview assessments, interview exams, these kind of things, they are normally used as indicators for us to understand about the candidates a little bit more. So understanding whether they are suitable, how much academic potential they demonstrate from that UCAS application stage. And we will then, similar to medicine as well. So we look at the kind of every single element and then make decision on, whether they are able to meet the criteria, for example, using BMAT score, UCAS scores to make that final decision.
I mean, for medicine, it's a little bit different in that certainly for UCAT, you will be taking it before you apply to medical school. BMAT, you will need to apply to take it before you apply to medical school, but currently the only sitting is in November. So you will take the sitting after you have applied. For the vast majority of medical schools, they will look through your application for your eligibility. So that is the initial selection process to make sure that you've met GCSE requirements, that you meet the A-level IB predictions that are required, or any English test scores that are required, etc. So they make sure that you are qualified. And then when they receive the UCAT or BMAT scores, they will use those to then help select students to interview. So on the whole, it's often a ranking system of going through all of the BMAT and UCAT scores to see which top 700 students we will take to interview, or more for some medical schools as well.
Yeah, perfect. I've just got one question from me. I'd just like to invite Lisa, who asked a question earlier regarding research. I was just wondering if you could further clarify your question. If you'd like to ask it again in the Q&A box, that could be super useful. In the meantime, just coming back to you guys, really, in terms of common question we get in terms of the weighting of the tests and how does it compare to the interviews and of course the general entry requirements to the courses. Is there weighting for those different aspects, or is your university approach a more holistic approach? Sarah, could we come back to you on that one to begin with?
Of course. So at the moment, we take quite a holistic approach. So we actually use personal statements and the BMAT to invite students to interview. From next year, we won't be using the personal statements, and we will just be using the entry requirements and the BMAT. So obviously then it is heavily weighted on the BMAT itself. And that's like a lot of institutions across the UK for medicine, is that it's heavily weighted on the aptitude test. Once you get to interview, it's then heavily weighted on the interview itself. And so the interview panel or the MMI, you'll get a total score for your MMI. And then there is another cut-off process that we look at how many offers we are able to make from that pool of interviewees. And so we won't be able to give offers to everybody who is interviewed, but we will look at our top scoring applicants. I think the really key thing to bring out in this session is the international cap. I noticed no one's asked about it today, but it's often very rife in the questions in these sorts of sessions, is that all UK medical schools have caps, governmental caps on the numbers of students that we are allowed to admit every year. And that is due to funding. It's due to the fact it costs a lot of money to train a medical student, vastly in addition to the fees that are paid, even though the fees are quite high for overseas students. We're only allowed to accept 7.5% of our intake for international students. So that means we have 24 places at UCL in our 334 cohort. And so that means that we have a lot of competition. We had nearly 1,000 international applicants this year for those 24 places. And so unfortunately, we only interview a very small number of overseas applicants.
And you, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the quota, exactly the same as UCL, 24 seats available for non-UK fee payers for medicine course. Again, for our medicine, we currently don't use personal statements at all. So our sort of shortlisting criteria are based on BMAT scores first and then entry requirements. So these are the two main elements we're looking for to identify the suitability of the interviewees. For other courses, again, we don't interview everybody, so we only interview the strong candidates. So usually they have to meet this, so the essential criteria first before they can be shortlisted for interviews. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and from King's perspective, it's a similar story. We won't look at the rest of the application unless the general course entry requirements are met in the first place. So I think that's a key factor to relay to your students for the counsellors on the call here. I see we've got through all the questions in the chat, which is great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jake, for your answers, and of course, Jake, for the presentation. And to the counsellors on the call, thank you for your questions. I hope you found the session useful. Also give you back 2 minutes of your time to grab a drink before the admissions Q&A session. So thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully see you in the next session shortly. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.